We're going to look at Hebrews chapter 8 today. We're going to start in verse 1 to see if we can get pointed to some clues about exactly what this author is talking about. So just Hebrews 8, 1 through 2 to start. Now, the main point of what we're saying is this. We do have such a high priest who sat down at the right hand of the throne of majesty in heaven, and who serves in the sanctuary, the true tabernacle set up by the Lord, not made by mere human beings. So if you've been following along the last couple of weeks, and all the way back at the start of the year when we started Hebrews, we've seen Hebrews is trying to address Jewish converts to Christianity who are underneath this old covenant, the ideas of the Old Testament, that God would deliver them through a prophet, that through this lineage, God would make covenants and laws, and then they've moved into this new covenant with Jesus, but there's some trepidation. Does this make sense? They're a little weary. So the author takes time to try to explain Jesus more fully. So if you remember chapter 3, he's called the apostle, the high priest of our confession. He's bigger than Moses. He's the complete fulfillment. He replaces Moses' message. And that's what we're trying to get through here. Jesus being the apostle of our confession. In other words, he's one sent by God to bring about the news that people should begin to believe and tell more people about. He's the apostle, the message bringer of this new confession. So we had this old confession that you were a part of, and you believe this new thing, and I'm reminding you of it. Does this make sense? That Jesus brings this forward. He's greater than Moses, his message supplants it. So in the last few chapters, underneath this old covenant, we've talked about priests, the Levites, that serve as these priests for Israel. They offer sacrifices in the tabernacle, and then later in the temple, right, to atone for the sins of the people. So if you remember, they can come here, people bring some barley and they burn it. Some of it's kept by the priests, and then once a year they get to go in the big place and they sacrifice a big bull for the atonement of all people. This is the system. Are we with this sacrificial system? Yes? Great. Good stuff. That's what we've seen in these last chapters, right? This sacrificial system that Jesus has become the new high priest of a new system. So this is the old system, new system. So Jesus is this high priest who not only brings sacrifices to God as an act of a priest, but who himself brought the final sacrifice once and for all. So if you remember, they have to do this. How many times can they go into the big place to do the big bull for the atonement of all people? Once a year, right? And how many people? One person. And then what happens the next year on the Day of Atonement, this holiday and this Jewish holiday, Yom Kippur? What do they do again? The same thing. And they sacrifice, and then people mess up and they do whatever. And then the next year, the high priest, he died. So they had to train a new high priest. They got a succession line. He gets trained up on all the good stuff. And then what does he do again? They go back in there again. And this happened every single year over and over and over. But we have this Jesus, this priest of this new system, who brought a sacrifice once and for all. You with me? How many times has Jesus brought a sacrifice? One time. We're going to keep expounding on this. And so the author of Hebrews says that he sat down. Let's see that again. But we have such a high priest who sat down at the right hand. I'm pretty handy. I'm pretty handy working in working digging or whatever. I'm not very handy if I'm sitting down. Does that make sense? I don't shovel terribly well sitting in a chair, right? It's hard to do good, hard, laborious work sitting down. So when someone sits, it's a sign their work is done. Does this make sense? It's complete. The high priest only sits when the sacrifice is completely over, but he's got to stand up the next day and do small sacrifices over and over until the next year of Day of Atonement, and he does it all over again. But it says, Jesus says, sat down. He's done. If you remember way back when about positions of authority, the person who sits is the one who's in charge. We kind of have this backwards because you're sitting, I'm standing. But in the old days, the king would sit in his throne and the people would come speak to him and stand before him. This is this imagery. So someone's sitting, their work is done, it's fulfilled, they're done laboring, the work is over. And so we have Jesus who sits down. The old priests, right, they could never truly finish their work because it was never done. Day after day after day after day, they had to offer sacrifices. And so no priest could offer sacrifices forever because eventually they died and someone took their place, this whole succession line. But it says that Christ is a better priest, right, because he sat down and he's reigning forever. He's never dying. Instead, he rose from the dead, is seated directly in the throne room because the sacrifice was complete, final, and finished. Does this make sense, these first two verses? So he's juxtaposing the author of the old priests and Jesus' actions. These guys have to keep going. Jesus is done. We good? Great. So the point, right, the author's making this whole letter is this: Jesus is this final, better high priest. He's complete forgiveness, a more clear revelation, a better relationship, and a better covenant. Everyone say the word covenant. Have you heard this word before? Have you ever used it outside of the church? Exactly. We're going to talk about covenant today a little bit and break down what this means. So let's continue on. We're going to read the rest of the chapter, 3 through 13. Ready? Here we go. Every high priest is appointed to offer both gifts and sacrifices, and so it was necessary for this one to also have something to offer. If he were on earth, he would not be a priest, for there are already priests who offer gifts prescribed by law. They serve at the sanctuary that's a copy, a shadow of what is in heaven. This is why Moses was warned when he was about to build the tabernacle. See to it that you make everything according to the pattern shown to you on this mountain. But in fact, the ministry Jesus received is far superior to theirs as the covenant, of which he is the mediator, is superior to the old one, since the new one is established on a better promises. If there had been nothing wrong with the first covenant, no place would have been sought for another. But God found fault with the people, and he said, we're going to skip this little middle section that's all indented and looks like it's from another Bible, because it is, another part of the Bible. It's going all the way down to 13. By calling this covenant new, he made the first one obsolete, and what is obsolete will be outdated and soon disappear. Let's talk about this word obsolete for a second. An obsolete tool. Does anyone think of anything in the world that was at one point the greatest thing in the universe that is now completely obsolete? Anyone got an idea? Like, anything come to mind? Abacus. An abacus. I'm sure there are people who still use abacuses? Right, but like my phone has a smarter calculator than an abacus. That's amazing. There's more computing power in my cell phone than the entire room of computers that landed people on the moon. That's, when you think about it, that's great. What else is obsolete technology? Obsolete invention technology. It was once the greatest and is now done with. The what? A sextant, right? So you aim it at the stars when you're sailing to help navigate. Now we've got global positioning satellites that help us go around. You could still use one. Why, right? Anything else? Huh? Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone? Yeah. Like the actual old sandstone? Sure. Because we've decoded it, it's now done. We don't need it anymore. Things translate for us because it existed one time. We can figure it out. Do you know what the Rosetta Stone was? Does anyone know this? This is a side note. Thank you for it's cool. It is why we can decode hieroglyphics. So it was the same things written next to each other. We assume, I guess. And it was Koine Greek and hieroglyphics on the other side. And so you were able to use Koine Greek to translate the hieroglyphics. That's why we can read ancient Egyptian. Anyway, moving on. That's why it's called Rosetta Stone. Side note for the day. Any other obsolete technology? And then I have two examples. One from my field of study, and then one that I think we all will be familiar with.
Fax machine.
A fax machine. You would think they're obsolete, but hospitals really love fax machines and beepers. My sister works in a hospital, and I think she still wears a beeper because why not? You know. So my two examples from my own form of my own work is a technology you used to, and I still have them, have ginormous, endless volumes of books helping you understand Greek or different commentaries of things. You'd have whole volume sets, there'd be 30 books in them, and it would have all this in it. Strong's Dictionary of the Greek, Strong's Dictionary of Biblical Greek is like 36 books, I think, and they're all like this long. It's every Greek word that appears in the Bible, and then how you could translate it. It's like a dictionary of Greek, and then it gives you all the references for it, help you translate it. And if you have Strong's, it's an entire 6-foot-tall shelf of books the whole way down. I have all of those books on my computer, and I can search them in a thing called Logos. Everyone say Logos. Everyone say thank you, Logos. So the Strong's books, if you buy the whole set, it's like $2,600 for a full set of bound ones. I got the whole thing on Logos. It was like $38. Everyone say, way to go, technology. Obsolete. It's obsolete. Bound books are nearly obsolete. They're not. I love the feel of books and the way they smell. The one that I think we all can get to is a combine. You know the big farm, a farming combine? That job used to be a scythe, this, and then a person who would bale all of them together. Do you know why it's called a combine? Because it does both of those tasks. It combines them together. That's why. It's way more effective. In the 1830s, 300 man-hours to plant and harvest 100 bushels of wheat. In 1975, it was reduced from 300 to 3. 3 man-hours with the advent of the combine. The Greek word for that obsolete in there is palaio. Oh, I'm going to make sure I get it. Palaio. Palaio. Everyone say palaio. It's a good word, isn't it? It's to make old, to wear out, decay, or wash away. Okay? So they're saying, the author of Hebrews is using this language, this obsolescence, this idea of out-of-dateness, to describe the old covenant priestly sacrificial system. It's like not like Logos. It's like a bound volume dictionary. It's like an abacus. It's like a scythe and baling hay. It's like, what did you say? It's like a fax machine, right? It's there, but there's something that's replaced it and is more efficient. It's better and clear. This is what they're trying to get to. This new covenant, right? Christ's priesthood, the sacrificial work on the cross, has made the old stuff worn out. It's decayed. It's not fulfilling it fully. Does this make sense? Okay. The old covenant's been replaced by this new covenant in every way. It's superior in every way. You had the sacrificial system with all these priests that die and they got to do it every year. Jesus has this one sacrifice. He sat down and he's done. Do you see this comparison that the writer is making? There's no reason for anyone to try to be under this old covenant anymore. He made a new covenant with Jews and Gentiles alike based on the work of Jesus. No more scythes, only combines. Good? Jesus is the better priest of a better covenant. The old covenant is done. It's never to be reinstated, because why would you reinstate the ineffective, out of date? Why would I choose to get 300 man-hours with scythes and bushel baling when I can just get a combine? You with me? So the question then becomes, why did we need to do away with the old one and bring about a new one? You with me? Like, did God mess up? Are you with me? Do you see what I mean? How this leads to this kind of weird question? Like, why is there this old one if the new one would work? Did he mess up? Like, why not just do the new one first? Are you with me? You with me? Okay, that's good. Let's break down. Let's go all the way back. We're going to clarify this word covenant that we've heard many times before. How many of you have used the word covenant in a common conversation outside of church? Merritt has? Of course Merritt had, you know. Where did you use it? Police Academy, obviously, the police. What are they making covenants with?
Talking about the unspoken covenant.
Oh, okay, yeah. Ashley had a covenant at Taylor. You have a Life Together covenant, the LTC, that you agree on how you're going to live together. I'm going to give you a word that's close enough to it that we understand a little better. It's the word contract. Everyone say contract. Contract. There's a little bit of difference, but for our purposes, it's close enough. And there were actually many covenants. If you did the Old Testament Bible study with us, we looked at 5 old covenants from there. So let's look at the big ones to help understand this a little better. Ultimately, a covenant is an agreement between 2 people where they're going to support or defend one another and have fulfillments, and there's things that happen if they break them. Think of like a contract. I'm going to agree to do this with you. I agree with it too. If we break it, I'll sue you. You owe me money. Are you with me? So the way it works is there's usually a person who has the stuff. Everyone say, you're not going to need it. We'll just do it. Why not? Everyone say, suzerain. Suzerain. That's the person who has the stuff. Think of like Sultan. That's how I always remember it. They're the person with the stuff. They're the strong person in the covenant. They're the person who is selling you the big house. And you're the other person. You with me? The other person in the covenant is called a vassal. Everyone say vassal. Like, I don't know. I don't have one for that. They're the person who's the weaker party in the covenant, in the agreement, okay? And you would make an agreement, usually between let's make up the name of a big empire at the time. We'll make up a name, like Egypt. And they have some small little countries in between them and another major superpower. And so they go to little tiny person and they go, we agree not to wipe your civilization off the planet as long as you pay us money and you give us food, and if we ever need armies, you'll send us people, and if you uphold that, we won't destroy you, and we'll protect you from being destroyed by the other people. You with me? And then Egypt, or the small country, would be like, yes, we'll do that, and then you won't destroy us. And then Egypt would say, if you mess it up, we'll wipe you off the planet. You with me? That's the mistake. So you have, hey, we'll help you, we'll keep you from being destroyed, but if you backstab us, we'll just wipe you off the face of the map. You with me? This is this language these people are familiar with. And so God makes these covenants with different people. And the first one is way back. We're going to look at the major one, and it's this guy named Abraham. Everyone say Abraham? Who was Abraham?
The super dad.
He's the big guy. He's the dude in all of Hebrew Jewish history. He's the establishment of all this stuff. And so God makes a covenant with Abraham. And what would happen when you make a covenant is you would have these agreements, and the big party would tell the little party to cut up an animal into pieces, and you would make like a road of the animal pieces. And then the person who is the weaker party would walk down the pieces back and forth like this, and they would say, basically, if I break this covenant, what happened to this animal, may it happen to me. Does this make sense? So if I wreck this agreement, you can take me apart and destroy me. You with me? This is this language. And so Abraham is told by God, you're going to have all these offspring, and you'll be this bringer of salvation, and you'll have a great nation and all these children. And Abraham's like 100-something years old, and he's got no kids. And he's like, when is this going to happen? I don't think this is going to happen anymore. And so God says, it's going to, and I promise it's going to happen. Let's make a covenant. And so Abraham, he hears the word, and he starts cutting up the animal pieces, and he sets them there. And right when Abraham's about to start walking through it, he falls asleep. He's put to sleep. And when he wakes up, he sees a flaming torch and a pot of smoking oil, symbols of God. We'll just jump the story there. Walking up and down the pieces. So let's get the image together. What's the person who's the big dog in the covenant called? Suzerain. And what's the lowest person called? Great. And who walks in the pieces? Ooh, the vassal. In this story with Abraham, who's walking amongst the pieces? God is. So God takes the position of the weaker party in this covenant. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? And he basically says, if I ever fail you, Abraham, in providing a nation, people, love, this agreement we have that I will bless you, you'll bless to be a nation. If I ever fail, if I ever let that go, then I will be destroyed. You with this backwards language. You would think it'd be Abraham, right? You'd think it'd be Abraham. Hey, if I screw this up, God, you just destroy me. You with me? But it's this reverse. God takes this position in this old covenant that says, if I ever fail this, if I ever fail to uphold this end, then I'll be the one who's destroyed. You with me? Backwards. Well, if you've read the Old Testament ever, how do the ancient Jews, Israelites do upholding their end of the covenant? They do terrible. They do awful. They're bad at it. Endless stories of the Old Testament through Judges, Kings, endless failures. But God keeps re-inviting into this covenant over and over and over. Because, why? He takes the position, I can't be the one to fail you. You with me? After so many failures, it starts to become clear that one side is going to have a very hard time upholding their end. Does this make sense? Like after like 45 books of the Old Testament, I think it's come clear that humanity is going to have a very hard time upholding their end of this complicated, difficult covenant. Are you with me? So Jesus, in Matthew 5:17 through 20, this is a preview of the Sermon on the Mount coming in a month or so. Jesus says, don't think that I've come to abolish the law, this old covenant or the prophets. I haven't come to abolish it, but to fulfill it, to complete it in a new way. Does this make sense? So let's see what Hebrews has to say about how this will be completed. Okay, and then we're going to tie this whole thing together. Hebrews 8, verse 8, kind of B. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah, and it will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors. When I took them by the hand, I led them out of Egypt because they didn't remain faithful to my covenant. I turned away from them. But this is the covenant that I will establish to the people of Israel, declares the Lord. After that time, I will put in the law in their minds. I will write it on their hearts. I will be their God. They will be my people. No longer will they teach their neighbor or say to one another, know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least to the greatest. For I will forgive their wickedness, and I will remember their sins no more. This is a quote from Jeremiah 31 through 34. That's a direct paraphrase from that Old Testament. It's a prophecy that Jeremiah gives the people of Israel, saying 650 years before Jesus shows up, this old covenant is going to be replaced, because what we've seen is you can't uphold it. But God can't give up on you, because why? Because he would be the one failing the covenant. You see this all tying around. Why did the old need to be replaced? Not because God changed his mind, but because he can't give up on people. Does this make sense how this all ties together? It's not like it was bad. We just couldn't do it anymore. It was obvious we were never going to get there. The problem was the people. The covenant itself, God's plan itself, wasn't flawed. It wasn't faulty. It wasn't a mistake. God didn't look down and be like, well, I guess that didn't work. I might as well just, whatever. He can't. The problem was the people. They continuously broke the covenant. They continuously ignored and forgot about it. The story of the Old Testament, right? People's unwillingness to live in God's covenant, that were pursuing selfish, distant, sinful things. It's why every single year the priest had to go into the altar and do an atonement day for every person in it. Every year it had to be done over and over and over, because they just couldn't hold it together. That's the purpose of the Old Covenant's test, the Old Covenant's purpose, right? It was to help show humanity the root of the problem, their unwillingness to obey God's commands. It's why the Old Covenant was laws to make you into a person that people would look at and see God. But they just couldn't do it. That's all the laws were meant people look at it and be like, man, those people got something figured out, to live differently, to look different. They just kept failing at it. So the new covenant is not, well, let's just scrap the crap and do something that might actually work. But it didn't work because you couldn't obtain it. So here's a better deal for you. Here's a better way for you to follow the covenant. Here's a better way for the covenant to be achievable by you. Here's a better way for you to live in a new way. And it wasn't just this new idea that Jesus sprang on people by surprise, right? He's been telling people about this new covenant all through Matthew, this return to the kingdom, right? Kingdom is where God's rule reigns, where we live in the authority of God, and the kingdom is coming back with Jesus. So he quotes Jeremiah 31:34 as well in his ministry through the Sermon on the Mount. 650 years beforehand, it's prophesied that someone would bring about this new covenant. And so it talks about how it will put their law in their minds and write it on their hearts. So the Old Covenant almost involved entirely external realities. It was always like, don't mix the offspring with the milk of the mother. That's like one of those classic Old Testament rules. So you can't make, this is a disaster. You can't make breaded chicken. Everyone just think about it, because you got to crack an egg. And then you got to put the chicken in the egg. You can't do that, because that's the offspring with the mother. You with me? Great. And you can't do like boiled milk steak because it's milk with beef. Anyway, moving on. Or cheese, because it's cheese and beef because it's milk. And anyway, moving on. It's all external realities. So the law was written on stone. The Ten Commandments coming down with the tablets. The sacrificial system was done with the possessions, the crops, the livestock. The Old Covenant encouraged people to put the copies of the law on your forehead and your wrists. People, if you ever see old, even today, Hasidic Jews, right, they keep things on their wrists with long scrolls, and it's the law written on their wrists and on their foreheads. They put them on when they pray. It's written on their wrists and their foreheads physically. So God takes this new covenant, and where does he say it's going to be? In their minds and in their... Right, not written down, nothing physical. God's people have always been commanded to worship him with their heart, soul, mind, and strength. In the Old Covenant, this command was carried out by their own human will, their own strength, and that's why it failed. They just couldn't achieve it. The reason it was set up like this was to show this inability, right? So this new covenant is better because God's going to put those things in their hearts and in their minds. Right? He wants us to see these things, have new desires, to transform the way that we even live and work and be. It says, I will be their God, and they will be my people, and each person will not teach their fellow citizen, and each brother or sister saying, know the Lord, because they will always know me, from the least to the greatest. So in the Old Covenant, being a member had to do with being born in the family of Abraham, because Abraham is super daddy, and his offspring represent the people of God. So you're born into it. You were born into this covenant. You didn't have to know him. Because of this, God needed to continually act to show who he was. So in Egypt, go and say, I was the father of Jacob. And they're like, who is this God? I don't even know who this is. What is his name? Moses is like, who am I supposed to say you even are? Right? And then through all the judges, they just keep forgetting, they get lost. Israel splits in half. It's a whole disaster. In this new covenant, every individual knows him personally. God reveals himself through the Holy Spirit. Right? This is the idea of the entire gospel message. He calls us and says, each of us will be called into the covenant. I'll know their name. They'll be like my sheep, and they'll know my voice as the shepherd. I'll forgive their wrongdoing, and I will never remember their sins. In the Old Testament, Old Covenant, the sacrificial system to atone was committed how often? How often did they sacrifice? Every single time they messed up, for every single thing. There are 55 million types of different offerings you can bring of different types for the different things you do. If you badmouth a neighbor, there's a sacrifice for that. If you murder someone, there's a sacrifice for that. If you steal from someone, there's a sacrifice for that. So every time you mess up, you go there with some barley or a goat or a sheep or whatever it is, you offer it, and that's what clears it off. And once a year, the Day of Atonement, it's wiped for everybody. But every single time, over and over and over and over. It was temporary atonement. It was temporary forgiveness. And then you go back to being out of alignment again next time you mess. Does that make sense? So in this new covenant, it's not temporary, but the entire forgiveness of past, present, and eventually those future ones, right? We're not James Bond, no license to murder. The new covenant is far superior, right? Entire forgiveness, inward spiritual transformation, personal relationship. The author of Hebrews says, why would you, ancient Hebrews that I'm writing to, want to go back to this old way? Where it's over and over, when something new has completely supplanted it. The new priest has given us something completely new. In the old covenant, you'd bring those sacrifices, crops, livestock, birds, whatever it was in your situation by the law. You'd give it to the priest. They'd present it on your behalf. You would trust that the priest does the right things. You have to trust that God was true to his word and that your sin was now atoned for every single time. But in this new covenant, right, we still bring a sacrifice, but it's only brought one time. In the book of Romans, Paul says we bring ourselves as a living sacrifice. We come to the great high priest and we give ourselves, our whole selves, into this new covenant. So Jesus provides not only the priest, the high priest, but also the one and ending sacrifice. And then he was risen from the dead and sits down to complete it. The old sign had a covenant. The old covenant had a sign that was given to those that were in it. It was a physical sign called circumcision. Everyone who was a part of it, every male had that follow it. That was the sign that they were a part of this covenant. The new one also has a sign, and I've been talking about a new class we're going to be doing soon. Isn't it great how stuff works up? There's two signs for it. One was that they enter through baptism. Baptism is this representation of going underwater into the grave, dying, and then coming up rebirthed as a new person out of the water into new life. This is this new sign. Baptism doesn't get you into it. It's the symbol that you're a part of it. And the second one was what Jesus did with his disciples on the last night that he was with them. He took the bread and the cup at dinner, and he lifted up the cup, lifted up the bread, and he broke it, and he said, "This is my body, take, eat. It will be a sign of a new covenant for you." The sacrifice of the body to bring about people into the new covenant. Isn't that interesting? At the end of dinner, he picked up the cup that had the wine in it, and he lifted it up. He said, "This cup is my blood poured out for the symbol of the new covenant shed for you." In the old system, the goat would come on the Day of Atonement, the big bowl or whatever it was, and they would cut the pieces off. They would break the body. They would pour out the blood, and they would take the blood. They'd pick it up, and they would go through the curtain. They would pour the blood over the Ark of the Covenant as a symbol of atonement. And that blood represented the forgiving sacrifice of the sins of the people. And so Jesus says, like that, like that old covenant, I'm going to raise up this cup, and my blood will be poured out for the forgiveness of sins for all people, once and final for all. This is the second symbol of being a part of the new covenant, a broken body and spilled blood of Jesus. But a remembrance for us to do the same. We bring ourselves as a living sacrifice to break our bodies and spill our blood for the fulfillment of this new kingdom to follow Jesus. Let's pray.